I am a 32-year-old woman, and my husband is 34. Last weekend, we went to a backyard barbecue at one of his old college friends' houses. It was one of those warm evenings where people stand around in small groups with drinks in their hands, burgers are sizzling on the grill, and music plays low enough that you can still hear conversations. Most of the guests were people Mark had known for over a decade, the kind of friends who trade the same inside jokes every time they meet. I was at the drink table, pouring a soda over ice, when I caught my husband's voice carrying over the music. He was standing with 3 of his closest buddies near the grill, laughing like he always does when he is telling a story. I did not catch the beginning, but I heard him clearly when he said, "Rachel's great, but she falls apart under pressure. I handle the important stuff." He grinned after saying it, as if it was just a harmless comment, but I noticed 2 of his friends glance at me quickly before looking away. The word stuck for a second, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. I screwed the cap back on the soda bottle and kept moving toward the group by the patio, making small talk with one of the wives about her new job. Still, I could feel that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that shows up when someone has embarrassed you, but you have to keep smiling. When I glanced toward Mark's group again, one of his friends, the quieter one, caught my eye. He gave me a quick, almost apologetic smile, like he knew the comment had landed wrong. That tiny look told me I had not misheard. They had all caught it too. It was not the first time something like that had happened. Over the years, Mark had made little digs like that in front of people. Always wrapped in humor, never aggressive. But the message was clear, he was the strong one. I was the one who needed managing. He had said similar things in front of my family before, too, often with a laugh and a pat on my shoulder, as if that made it fine. The night went on, people refilled their drinks, the food came off the grill, and I kept up with polite conversation. When it was finally time to leave, we said our goodbyes and headed to the car. The ride home was quiet on my end. Mark filled the silence by talking about a game he wanted to watch and how his old roommate had lost weight since they last saw him. I looked out the window, watching the lights of the houses go by, replaying his words at the barbecue over and over. Mark has always liked to see himself as the calm, capable one in the relationship. With my family, with our friends, even with people he has just met, he tells stories that paint him as the problem solver. Once, when my sister complimented how well we managed our bills, he jumped in to say he was the one who kept things running because I would get stressed out. He says these things casually, like they are harmless facts. The truth is, I have been through situations that would have flattened some people, and I stayed steady. When my dad was seriously ill, I was the one balancing the bills, handling the hospital visits, and making sure our house was in order. I kept track of his medications, made sure my mom was eating properly, and still showed up to work every day. I did not crumble. Mark, on the other hand, can lose his cool over a wrong food order, or when a delivery is late. I have seen him curse at his phone when the Wi-Fi is slow and get visibly flustered if his plans change unexpectedly. That night, lying in bed next to him while he snored, I thought about it. Confronting him directly had never worked before. He would either laugh it off or tell me I was being too sensitive. This time, I decided not to argue. Instead, I would let him live through a week where things went wrong and I did not step in to fix them. I would not create the problems, but I also would not be his buffer. The idea took shape quickly in my mind. If life was going to hand us inconveniences, I would let them land right in his lap. Missed deliveries, household repairs, car issues, all the little things I usually handled quietly would be his to deal with. I would stay calm, step back, and watch. This was not about getting revenge for one comment. It was about the fact that he genuinely believed he was better at handling pressure, and I wanted him to see how that belief held up when I was not smoothing the edges for him. I decided I would only step in if something was truly urgent, the kind of thing where doing nothing would cause serious harm. But for everyday stress, I would keep my hands off. The right moment would come soon enough. All it would take was a mix of bad timing and unavoidable problems. People get sick, things break, bills come due. It is part of life. He had just never had to face them without me quietly working behind the scenes. I went to sleep that night with the plan already forming. The next week was shaping up to be busy for him with work. If the timing was right, I could just let the normal chaos of life unfold. And deep down, I suspected that moment would arrive a lot sooner than he could imagine. Monday morning started out like any other. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of coffee dripping and eggs sizzling in the pan. The light came through the blinds in narrow stripes across the counter. I plated breakfast, set the mugs out, and kept my movements calm and steady. While I was rinsing berries at the sink, I heard Mark's voice coming from the living room. He was on the phone, pacing slowly across the carpet. His tone was light, but there was that familiar edge of pride in it. He told his brother that he was the one who kept me level-headed when I got worked up. The words carried clearly into the kitchen, even over the running water. The berries went into a bowl, and I kept my back to the doorway until the call ended. By the time he stepped in for coffee, I was wiping the counter as if I had not heard a thing. That was the moment the plan solidified. If he believed he was the one who kept things from spiraling, then the next week would be his to handle without my invisible hand in the background. I already knew the points where his patience wore thin, deadlines that move at the last second, bills that land on the same day, a calendar that gets out of order. These were the small cracks that widened fast when enough pressure was on him. The car was one of them. We shared a single vehicle, and for weeks a recall notice had been sitting on the hall table. He had brushed it off every time, saying he would get to it when he had the time. That envelope was leverage. Later that morning, when he left for work, I called the shop listed on the notice. The receptionist checked the system and said the car needed to be brought in as soon as possible. It was a safety issue, not something that could wait. They had an opening midweek. I wrote the details down and folded the paper into my notebook. Mark had no idea that slot was reserved. I would wait for the timing to line up with his already full schedule. That afternoon, I checked the calendar on the fridge. His department-wide presentation was set for the following Thursday. On top of that, his boss from out of state was visiting for the first time in person. He had mentioned it more than once, always with that extra lift in his voice that meant he wanted things to go perfectly. If the car recall appointment happened in the same window as his preparation days, it would be enough to nudge the cracks wider. I would not have to do anything more than let the normal flow of life take its course. When he got home that evening, the house smelled like roasted chicken and herbs. We ate at the table, and he talked about the presentation, listing who would be attending and how his part was to tie the whole project together. He was proud of that role. While clearing plates, I connected the pieces in my head: the work deadline, the car, the likelihood that something else in the house would act up just from bad luck. It was more than enough to let the plan breathe. After dinner, I leaned against the counter and made a light comment about hoping next week would be easy. He smirked without looking up from his phone, the kind of look that said he was sure he could handle whatever came. In my head, I locked the boundary. No jumping in to fix anything. No rearranging my day to smooth things over for him. Unless something truly urgent came up, the week ahead would be his to navigate without my shortcuts or quiet interventions. The rest of the night passed without incident. The television murmured from the living room while I folded laundry. The reserved appointment for the car sat in my notebook, untouched. Tuesday would be the starting line. Everything after that would simply be me stepping back and letting the days run their course. The countdown had begun. Tuesday morning, the sound of the mail slot clattering echoed through the hallway. Among the usual envelopes was another notice from the car manufacturer. The bold red letters on the front read urgent recall. I set it on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker where Mark would see it when he came in for his mug. He walked in, hair still damp from the shower, and reached for the pot. His eyes caught on the envelope. He tore it open, scanned the first few lines, and frowned. With a shake of his head, he muttered something about bad timing, folded the letter in half, and left it on the counter. The coffee went into his travel mug, and he was out the door without mentioning it again. By mid-afternoon, the first real hiccup of the week showed up. I went to switch the laundry and found the washing machine leaking water across the floor. I grabbed 2 old towels, laid them over the growing puddle, and left the door to the laundry room open, so it would be the first thing he noticed when he came home. The front door opened just after 6. He dropped his keys in the bowl and set his work bag down harder than usual. His steps were heavier than normal, and he let out a long exhale as he walked past. The presentation had been changed again, this time with new requirements he had not planned for. He kicked off his shoes and turned toward the kitchen, only to catch sight of the laundry room. He stood in the doorway, staring at the towels before groaning about how everything seemed to be happening at once. I mentioned that a repair service could be called, then went back to chopping vegetables for dinner. No phone call was made. The next knock on the door came from our neighbor. He wore a raincoat and pointed toward the fence that separated our backyards. One section was leaning, and a few boards were splintered, likely from the windstorm the night before. He said it should be fixed soon before it got worse. When the door closed, Mark muttered something about never getting a break, rubbing his temples as he moved toward the couch. His pacing picked up. Every few minutes, he would check his phone, then set it down, then pick it up again. Around noon the next day, my phone buzzed with a message in all capital letters. His laptop was refusing to connect to the work server, and he had files due. I replied to remind him that the car shop had confirmed the recall appointment for tomorrow morning. There was no response for a while, just 3 dots flashing, disappearing, then flashing again before the conversation ended without another word from him. That evening, while I was slicing bread, the dog barked at a noise outside. The sound was short, but it was enough for Mark to snap at him sharply from the living room. The dog went quiet and retreated to his bed. Dinner was quiet. I served the plates, filled the water glasses, and kept the pace of the meal steady. The clink of cutlery was the only sound between us. He ate quickly, barely looking up from his plate. His shoulders stayed tense, and his jaw was set in that tight way it gets when he is holding something in. The week had only just started, and the cracks were already visible. I cleared the dishes, stacked them by the sink, and decided to leave the evening as it was. No new tasks, no extra problems to bring up yet. The rest of the plan could wait until the tension had a little more time to build on its own. Wednesday started with Mark at the kitchen table, scrolling through his emails while his coffee steamed in front of him. His face tightened as he read one of them. His boss had sent a request for extra data to be included in tomorrow's presentation. It meant more work on top of what he already had planned. While he was still muttering to himself over the laptop, I mentioned the recall appointment for the car. The shop had a slot today, and it needed to be dropped off before the end of the morning. He checked the time, grabbed his keys, and decided to swing by the shop before heading to the office. The plan didn't work out smoothly. Heavy traffic stretched the drive by nearly half an hour, and he ended up pacing in the mechanic's lobby while the paperwork was processed. By the time he left, the clock had him running late for work. A short, irritated message landed on my phone, complaining about how much time it had taken. I sent back a simple reply about it being better to fix the car now than risk something worse later. An hour later, the mechanic called again. The inspection had found another safety problem, unrelated to the recall, and the repair would cost more. I passed the message on to Mark. He fired back a line about everything costing money at the worst time. While he was still juggling the extra work for his presentation, the washing machine repair service returned my earlier call and confirmed they could send someone tomorrow morning. The only problem was the timing. It was almost exactly when his presentation was scheduled. I forwarded him the appointment details. A few minutes later, another message came through telling me to just deal with it, followed by a complaint about me making too many choices without checking with him. I didn't answer. That evening, our grocery delivery arrived, but half the items from his dinner request were missing. There was no chicken, no salad mix, and no fresh bread. I set the bags on the counter, checked the substitutions they had made, and put together a different meal from what was available. The smell of garlic and onions filled the kitchen while Mark kept up a low string of grumbling from the living room. Halfway through cooking, there was another knock at the door. It was the same neighbor from earlier in the week, this time pointing out that the damaged section of the fence was leaning more now. He said if it wasn't fixed soon, it might fall into his yard. I nodded and closed the door. Mark came in from the living room as I was turning back to the stove. His jaw was tight, and after a few words under his breath, he slammed the door a little harder than necessary on his way back out. By the time dinner was served, his movements were short and sharp, and his eyes kept flicking toward his laptop bag. The presentation was tomorrow, the car was still in the shop, the washing machine repair was set for the morning, and now the fence was on the list. It was only midweek, and the real pressure hadn't even started yet. Thursday started before sunrise with the sound of Mark's phone buzzing on the nightstand. He read the message, sat up quickly, and began typing a reply. His presentation had been moved up by an hour, which meant less preparation time than planned. In the middle of setting up his laptop on the dining table, another call came in. The washing machine repair technician confirmed they were on their way and would arrive around the same time his meeting was supposed to start. He walked back and forth between the table and the laundry room, telling me where they should work while adjusting the camera angle on his laptop. A few minutes later, the technician called again to say they would actually arrive shortly before his meeting ended. Mark muttered about terrible timing and went back to clicking through slides. The next update came from the mechanic. They sent several photos showing the car's undercarriage and noted that hidden safety issues had been found. The repairs would cost even more than the earlier estimate. Mark paced the length of the room, saying that none of this would be happening if things had been handled better from the start. Halfway through a call with his boss, the dog knocked over a plant near the window. Soil scattered across the rug and into the corner. Mark's voice rose sharply at the dog, forgetting to mute his microphone. The boss's voice came through the speaker asking if everything was all right. Mark gave a short answer and turned back to his slides. The washing machine technician arrived right in the middle of the meeting. Tools clinked in the laundry room while the sound of water being drained came through. Mark kept glancing away from the screen. Then the doorbell rang again. The fence contractor stepped in to inspect the leaning section. I had booked the visit earlier in the week and hadn't mentioned the exact timing. Mark moved between the back door and the laundry room, trying to answer the technician's questions while showing the contractor the damage outside. As the presentation was reaching its final slides, the internet connection cut out completely. Mark's voice stopped mid-sentence, and the video froze. He scrambled to reconnect, rejoining the call just in time to finish with a shorter conclusion than planned. When the call ended, he stayed seated for a moment, shoulders dropped. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the washing machine repair in progress. He stood, muttered about nothing going right this week, and left the laptop open on the table. Tomorrow would be the last and hardest day of the week, and I had no intention of stepping in to soften it. Friday started before dawn. The house was still dark when Mark's phone lit up again with a new message. This time it was from a coworker. The CEO would be sitting in on his afternoon presentation. In the kitchen, he went straight for the coffee while glancing at the clock. Before he could settle at the table, the phone rang. It was the mechanic. The car wouldn't be ready until tomorrow. That left him with two choices, my bicycle or the bus. He stood by the counter, tapping his fingers against the mug, before trying to book a ride share on his phone. None were available in time. The bicycle stayed propped against the wall, untouched, while he muttered about how ridiculous it was. I mentioned the bus schedule, pointing out the nearest stop. He waved it off and kept scrolling on his phone. Before he could return to his laptop, another call came in. The washing machine technician explained that yesterday's repair hadn't fully fixed the issue. A replacement part was needed, and the order had to be made today if we wanted it done within the week. Minutes later, the fence contractor sent a message. The damaged section had shifted again, overnight, and was now leaning farther into the neighbor's yard. He recommended repairs within days to avoid a complete collapse. Mark's phone buzzed again mid-conversation with the CEO's assistant. This time it wasn't a call, but the phone itself shutting down. The battery had drained completely. He stared at the blank screen, then grabbed the charger from the wall, waiting for it to power back up. By the time it restarted, he'd missed the confirmation for his meeting link and had to track it down again. Just as he was about to sit, the dog made a loud retching sound near the doorway. He rushed over with paper towels as the dog vomited on the carpet. The smell filled the air while he worked to scrub it out. With his notes stacked under his arm, he left for the bus stop. The morning air was cold, and the bus arrived a few minutes late. He managed to get a seat near the back, setting his presentation materials on his lap. 2 stops later, a passenger moving down the aisle spilled coffee, and a splash landed directly on the corner of his notes. By mid-afternoon, I received a call from him. His voice was low and tight as he explained that it had been the most stressful day of his life. The CEO had joined on time, but the presentation software lagged twice, and half his slides took longer than expected to load. When he got home, his shirt was wrinkled from the bus ride, and his bag strap was twisted from being yanked over his shoulder. The bicycle still leaned against the wall, untouched. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the dog's nails clicking on the floor as he moved between rooms. Mark set his things down, took a deep breath, and walked straight to the couch. The week wasn't over yet, but the strain on his face showed every piece of it. Saturday started without the usual noise. No early calls, no knocks at the door, no barking from the dog at delivery drivers. The light through the kitchen window was soft, the kind that made the room feel calmer than it had all week. Breakfast sat on the table while Mark scrolled through his phone, idly moving food around his plate. Between sips of coffee, he mentioned that maybe the week had been more stressful than he'd expected. I kept my eyes on my own plate and said it had been a full week. Around midday, the phone rang. It was the mechanic. The car was ready, but they would need to pick it up within the hour or it would be locked in the shop until Monday. The shop was across town, rideshare showed no available drivers, and the bus schedule was thin for the weekend. Mark checked the time twice in less than a minute, muttering about how the timing was impossible. I pointed out a route, bus part of the way, then a short bike ride from a transfer stop. He waved it off as too much hassle. I got my backpack, pulled the bike from the wall, and told him I was going. If he wanted the car today, he could come. The bus ride was quiet, both of us watching the clock as the city passed by outside the window. At the transfer stop, we got off and started the ride together. The air was cool, the street lightly sloped, and the bike chain clicked steadily as we moved. We rolled into the mechanic's lot with a few minutes to spare before closing. The car keys were set on the counter, the paperwork signed. As the mechanic slid the last form across to us, Mark looked over and said I'd handled that better than he had. I thanked the mechanic, slipped the keys into my bag, and headed for the car. The drive home was quieter than usual. The streets were clear, the late afternoon light stretching shadows across the pavement. Later, while going over plans for the coming month, he started to make one of his usual comments about my ability to handle stress. He stopped halfway through the sentence, thought for a moment, and moved on without saying it. That night, we had dinner without the usual edge in the air. The TV played in the background while I folded laundry, and for the first time in a while, there were no little jabs slipped into conversation. It wasn't some big dramatic change, but it was enough to notice. He didn't say I'd proven anything, and I didn't press for it. But the silence where those comments used to be said more than an apology would have. I went to bed knowing he'd gotten his own answer, and I didn't need to explain it. Some lessons stick without being spoken.